use. And you can see we've got a whole collage of them here behind us, ranging from weather balloons to barometers to anemometers to Doppler radar to rain gauges. So let's get started.
Let's delve into it.
All right. First one that we have today to discuss is the thermometer.
That's right.
Most people are familiar with that.
I think so. And the thermometer, we'll pop it up here. We'll show you here. Now, thermometer, most of you are familiar with this. It measures air temperature. And here in the United States, we're still in Fahrenheit, but most other countries use the Celsius scale. Don't expect us to catch up anytime soon. They've been battling this for 50 years, literally. I grew up. And I'm kind of old, and they still had the battle for Fahrenheit and Celsius. Now, we have two types of thermometers. The one here is the mercury thermometer, another one called an aneroid thermometer. Do we have the thermometer in the office by chance?
I don't know if we do or not.
Okay, all right.
With the clock face on
yeah,
it?
Yeah. And Tom Atkins uses that in Weather in the Neighborhood. That uses a strip of metal, and it expands and contracts, and that moves the dial in the meter that you see on the air. Here we use mercury, or actually it's not mercury anymore. They use some other type of glycerin type.
Yeah.
Mercury is a hazardous material. We're not allowed to use that, but it's still basically red. Now, when you heat something up, it expands, and that's what makes that red go up. And of course, we have the graph on there. That's how you can tell what the temperature is.
Looks like it's reading about 60 degrees there.
Wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, degrees Fahrenheit. So like Tom was saying, on the left, that's the side that we focus on here in the US of A. So a couple different thermometers. We showed you the basic idea behind the thermometer, and probably the most familiar one for everyone. Everyone has seen a thermometer. The next one that we wanted to discuss with you today is the barometer. Now this one, it measures the pressure of the air. Now, some of you watching might be a little young, but if your parents are out there, you've all heard of the Queen song, Pressure.
Yes.
You know, and that's literally what happens in the atmosphere, higher and lower pressure. You don't feel it, though. That pressure pushing down on you indicates higher pressure, and with high pressure, that's usually nice weather. Now, sometimes it gets a little complicated in the winter because it's a little bit what we call dirty. But generally speaking, high pressure, fair weather, nice, sunshine, patchy clouds, and the low pressure is the nasty stuff, the yucky stuff. Rain, snow, or otherwise. So high pressure is what you want to root for if you want great weather. And as the air pressure changes, that needle, that red needle that you see there on the barometer, moves as the air pressure changes. Now, as you get older, you might feel a little bit of that pressure change in terms of like migraines and aches and pains, but for the kiddos that are watching, you don't have to worry about that.
Speaking of which, I can attest to that. You know, I actually got hit with a softball back in my 20s, and on my finger. And my finger, you know, during the storms that we had over the weekend, we had a lot of pressure changes there. You can come back to the camera there. It actually, I could feel it. I can feel a little bit, you know. So yeah, you know, my wife is a great barometer.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting a headache, honey. That means the rain's coming, and she's not bad.
The human barometer.
Yes, the human barometer. So yes, because our bodies are water. And that's how, you know, that's the air pressure changes affect how the water moves through the atmosphere. And that's what it's all about.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what pressure is very important in predicting and trying to forecast the weather. Air is weighty. So think of it as kind of like when there's low pressure nearby, think of it as the atmosphere being on a diet. It's losing weight.
It is.
However, with high pressure, we're packing the pounds on.
In wintertime, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
In order to get clouds, you need the air to go up. And so when the pressure's low, the air is more buoyant and it can rise better. That's why we usually get the clouds and the precipitation. Think of it almost like a vacuum cleaner. It's sucking the air up into it.
Right.
High pressure, think of it as a blow dryer. It's blowing air down, suppressing it so the clouds can't build up.
Right.
So pressure, very important. Our next instrument here is the anemometer. Oh boy, you can impress your friends by saying that 10 times fast. Anemometer, this measures the wind speed. Technically, it doesn't measure the wind direction. The wind vane does that, but the anemometer measures the wind speed. Most anemometers, like you see there, they have cups, and the air catches those cups, and that's what causes the cups to move. So we have 3 of them there. Usually that's a standard amount. And it's connected, nowadays it's connected by computers. It measures the rotation, the speed of the rotation, and it converts it into a wind speed, again, depending on how it's converted. Now, we use miles per hour.
Right.
If you're on the water, we use knots, K-N-O-T-S. 1 knot is equal to 1.1 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So when the winds are low, knots and miles per hour are about the same. Once you get above like 20 miles an hour, then you notice the difference.
Yeah, yeah. So those cups spin around real fast, and that's how we determine how fast the wind is moving. You mentioned, Tom, the weather vane or wind vane. We have that for you too. Now this is real simple. It just indicates the direction of the wind. So you can see that rooster there on top of our wind vane. You see these on like barns and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Basically, real simple. It just indicates which direction the wind is blowing by spinning around, north, south, east, or west. And an example, so a southwest wind blows towards the northeast.
Yes.
So it's the direction that the way the wind is blowing towards.
And that's important. I know when I teach my students, it's the one thing
it's kind of confusing.
It's confusing. So, what is the wind direction? Think of it, how the wind is hitting your back, not hitting your face.
Right.
So if you're pointing toward, if you're standing north and you're facing the lake and the wind is hitting your back, then that's a south wind. If you turn your back away from the lake, and it's hitting your back, that's a north wind. So it's how the wind is hitting your back, not how it's hitting your face. That is the direction. So it's the direction wind is coming from, not where it's blowing to.
Right, exactly. So a little bit kind of confusing to think about, but we just kind of wanted to make that little qualifier there.
Absolutely.
And that's how we determine that, by using a weather vane or wind vane. And again, you see a lot of these out and about on old barns and stuff like that.
Sure.
So.
And at the airports where weather's, where the actual the instruments are taken, the official weather observations.
All right.
Next, rain gauge. Okay, and rain gauge, as the name implies, it measures how much rainfall is occurring. Now, in order to measure the rainfall accurately, you really need a true rain gauge. You can't just put a bucket out there or a glass and stick a ruler in it. It has to be of a certain dimensions like you have there on the screen. Or, come back to us there, Cindy. There is an actual rain gauge.
I don't know if you guys can see that, but look at that.
There you go.
Right there? Yeah. So basically, this is one of the official rain gauges that we use to measure. The water collects inside. There's a ruler in there. And as the water fills up, you could correlate how much rain fell by looking at the ruler. So that's kind of a real live example of a rain gauge. It looks pretty simple, but it's actually pretty involved.
It is involved. It involves a lot of math, and we talked about math before. On Monday, you have to have it a certain. You have to have the circumference of the circle at a certain width, and the rain gauge itself, the tube inside there, needs to be a certain size and a certain width and a certain length. That's why you can't just throw glass in a ruler. You can get an approximation there, but to get the true amount, you really need it. And these are very inexpensive.
Right.
And it's made, tough plastic there, so you can have it. Now, you would say, well, what about the wintertime? How do we measure snow? Well, there's 2 ways you can measure snow. Am I encroaching on a future talk here? Okay.
Nope, you're
just
good.
Making sure. Craig is the one who does all the subject matter.
Well,
so
I mean, it's precipitation. So
it is. It's precipitation. And so a lot of times, when you measure snowfall, you can put snow in that, you can, get the snow that
melts.
Well, you can do 1 of 2 ways. And the Weather Service, the rain gauge is actually metal, and they can heat the metal, so when the snow hits, it melts, goes into the rain gauge, and they can convert it, depending on, convert the snowfall to a rainfall amounts by a conversion factor. You may have heard maybe a 10-to-1 is the typical 10 inches of snow to 1 inch of rain, but wet snow is a little more, dry snow is a little bit less.
So that's kind of an example of the rain gauge, and like Tom said, you know, there's actually, we won't go too much into it, but there's actually a board that we use at the airport to measure snow. But we're going into summer, and we want to think about summer.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
no snow. No snow.
No.
All right, so that's the rain gauge. Now, this next one is satellite. Now, this is very important to us as meteorologists, that is, as we say in English. A satellite is launched by a rocket in the United States up into space. And we have two of them, goes east and goes west. Now, goes, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it stands for Geo-Orbiting Earth Satellite. Goes 1 and goes 2. Goes 2 is west and goes 1 is east. So these satellites are docked in place, which means they're stationary, but they also move with the Earth as it rotates. So we always get the same picture of the Earth. And there are millions and millions of dollars worth of
Big
equipment,
time, yes.
satellites in space that continue to keep an eye on us. Or at least the weather here.
Absolutely. And these, excuse me, these satellites are, believe it or not, they're 22,000 miles away.
Right.
So if you, I mean, how far is that? You know, the United States is about 3,000 miles, say, from New York to Los Angeles. If you took the United States and put Los Angeles on the ground and New York City pointing up into space, you need 7 United States plus 1/3 of another to reach the satellite, which is really incredible. Something so far away can give us such precise pictures.
And we use them daily. Very important tool. And we have an example from 22,000 miles above your head right now. Now, what you're going to see on this, this is what we call the visible satellite. So what this is doing is it's using the sun's light to show you where the clouds, which is why it starts out with that whitish color, and then you see it turn black.
Right.
Let's bring this up full and we'll show you. You see all the clouds that are moving. So watch, this is when the sun's down. Now the sun's up. We're using the sunlight and you see all the clouds popping up right there. Watch it again as we loop this again. See all the clouds moving? That's what you're looking at in terms of the satellite picture, and that's the visible spectrum. So again, using the sun's light to show you where the clouds are right now. Pretty neat stuff.
Right. Basically, the visible is basically like your digital camera in space. You know, I mean, if there's no light, you have no picture.
Right.
No matter how good your camera is. But this is visible. Generally speaking, the brighter the colors here, and while the grayer clouds tend to be the thin clouds. So we can tell how clouds are thicker and thinner.
And there are several different channels satellites use, but for our purposes, we're showing you the visible because it's cool, and I like seeing the visible.
It is. Visible is cool, and we utilize them. You may remember some of the storms that we had on Sunday. We use a visible satellite picture. We can see the clouds actually.
Right.
It almost looks like an explosion. We can see where those clouds form. So we use, not only do we see, well, where is it cloudy, where isn't it, but we use them for severe weather, we use them for fog, we use them in so many ways.
Yeah, so that's the view from 22,000 miles above your head. How cool is that?
Gotta love it.
All right, another important one. Tom.
Doppler radar, absolutely. Now, radar is basically, it's a radio wave. Not much different than radio. Does anyone listen to radios now, or is that?
I don't know, maybe.
Does anyone listen to true radios? But that is a Doppler transmitter, and what it does, it transmits a radio beam toward raindrops and snowflakes. Now, when it hits those raindrops, it comes back to the radar site. Some of the energy bounces off, and that's how we see rain and snow. That's conventional radar. Doppler radar, so what regular radar does, it can show you how hard the rain is falling, if you want to come back to us, Cindy. How hard the rain is falling vertically, falling down. Doppler radar can also show how the raindrops are spinning horizontally. So if you have raindrops going toward the radar at 50 miles an hour, and right next to it going away from the radar at 50 miles an hour, what would we might what might we think is happening?
Ooh, might be a little stormy.
A little stormy.
Might be a little twisting
Maybe a little twisting going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what the Doppler effect does. The Doppler.
Real important, and you can kind of, there's the Doppler effect, which you mentioned, which basically, you know, when you hear like a helicopter coming and you hear it go by and then the noise starts to disappear, that's the kind of the same ideology behind radar. And really to kind of sum that up for you, it's basically that radar, that parabolic antenna in there, goes up into the sky, probably about 300 some odd miles, something like that, and it does a full 360 revolution of the sky, and as that energy beam goes out, if it encounters something, so here's the energy beam, it bounces back to the radar, and that's how we see where the precipitation particles
and the harder the precipitation is falling, you know, think of heavy rain as like a solid wall. If you have a tennis ball and you throw it against a hard wall, it bounces back to you pretty nice. If you put 1 foot of cotton and you throw it, it doesn't bounce back as much. So when you have heavy rain, that's like the solid wall, a good bounce. And what you see here, let's go full screen here, Sin. See where the yellow is on the bottom of the screen? This is actually a current radar. There, it's a better bounce, which usually means a steadier, heavier rain, where the lighter greens, it's like someone put a little bit of cotton on there, not as much as bouncing back. So they're lighter rain.
And what's really cool, if you come back to us on camera, we're going to quickly talk about this. You see that right up there under the Weather Authority, this right here? Sometimes radar can pick up wind farms, windmills.
Yes.
That's what that is. So radar is very, very important tool, and it's almost a daily use for us in meteorology. All right, we got a couple more to go over here. Let's talk about the weather balloon. These launch twice a day from the National Weather Service offices across the United States. And what's more important is what's attached to the weather balloon. It's called a radiosonde, which measures temperature, pressure, wind, humidity, dew point as it goes up in altitude. Now, if you're familiar, and I'm sure your parents have taught you about this, as the balloon goes up, it can only go up so high before it pops. Well, what happens to that computer is there's attached to that radiosonde is a little parachute, and it kind of floats back down to Earth, and sometimes they land in people's yards. And there's instructions on what you should do. If you find one of those, you should email it back to the National Weather Service office, or not, I shouldn't say email, mail it.
Yeah, conventional mail.
Conventional mail, and send it back to them. But not many people do that. They like to keep it as a little souvenir.
They like to keep it. Yeah, and I mean, not to scare you, okay, but it is federal government property. Not that they're going to send the FBI after you. But, you know, they're not cheap, so so we understand wanting to keep them. But if you find one, give it back.
Give it back. And the cool thing is, as we get down to quitting time here, some of these things can come from states away, because as the weather balloon goes up, it gets caught in the upper level wind flow, and that carries that weather balloon away. So if you find one in your backyard here in Northwest PA, who knows? It may have come from Ohio, Indiana.
Could, perhaps so, depending on the wind direction.
All right, and this is kind of the last topic that we'll discuss today in terms of the weather instruments. Tom?
Yes, we, of course, as good as we like to think we are, okay, in forecasting, and a lot of it is skill of the meteorologist, we do have to rely on computers, because meteorology is so complex that computers tell us where pressure systems are, temperature systems are, where precipitation falls. We have many types of computer models. There are literally dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of them. Many by the Weather Service, some by colleges, private forecasting firms have their own. Our own computer has its own computer models.
An in-house model,
Right, and what we do is we use those to help us figure out where weather systems are going to move in certain times in the future, and what kind of weather they can be. Now, we talked a lot about error on Monday. So, yeah, if the models were perfect, our jobs would be super easy.
They wouldn't need us.
We just have to sit down. Well, it's going to rain in Erie from 3 until 5 o'clock tomorrow. Goodbye.
Yeah. Guidance is not gospel.
Right.
It's guidance for a reason. And I know there's a lot to look at on that map, but you're talking about isobars, which are lines of constant pressure. isotherms, lines of constant temperature, and those have all got to come together to figure out what exactly is going to happen. Because as we discussed with the weather balloons, we have to know what's going on up there before we could tell you what's going on down here. So
Absolutely.
weather computers, very
important indeed.
All right?
Okay. Well,
So-
that about, oh, no,
Yeah, no.
one more thing.
We
No, no,
do-
one more thing. We have to do this.
We have to do this.
We have to do this,
Okay. We are asking kind of the theme of this here. What inspires you? Now, we had a great amount of emails that have come in. We're going to try and get to those maybe next go around.
Sure.
Keep sending us your weather questions, weather at wjettv.com. We had questions about earthquakes and all kinds of stuff. Doppler radar. We're trying to answer as many as we can, but great response. We love that you guys are here with us.
Absolutely.
We really do.
We do.
And just a quick note, if you missed the live feed, we do post it on the website, so yourerie.com. If you can't be here at 10:30, you just hover over weather at the top of the page. There's going to be a little drop down, and in that drop down, you'll see Weather Academy, and we'll always replay the latest
And we keep
episode.
them all, you know, so these will accumulate through the years. So you can watch us anytime, anywhere. We had a lot of people say, well, I'm not available at 10:30.
Yeah.
And, well, now you know what you can do if you're not available.
And
But
remember-
we're glad you're live.
What inspires you?
What does?
It can be anything in the world. Find out about it, learn about it, and that is going to do it for this edition of Weather Academy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be here on Friday at 10:30. Yours truly, along with Craig
Yeah.
Flint. Want to thank you so much for joining us. And again, keep thinking. What inspires you? We'll talk to you Friday.
See ya.